After the death of Ar-Adunakor, his heir Ar-Zimrathon inherited the scepter in the year 2962, followed by his son Ar-Sakalthor in 3033 and Ar-Gimilzor in 3102. Throughout these years, the corruption of the Numenorians deepened, and the Kingsmen faction grew more influential, leading the population to turn against the Valar and Elves, resenting their immortality and the ban that kept humanity from sailing west to the Undying Lands. Though the Valar, Maiar, and Elves were all permitted to live in Valinor, upon the continent of Aman, experiencing the enchanted paradise for as long as they wished, mortal men were forbidden from traveling to these sacred lands. In the beginning, humans were happy to make their lives in the east, but in the later years of Numenorian power, some came to see it as an injustice that elves who once rebelled and left the Undying Lands were allowed to return, but the high men of Numenor who fought for the Valar in the War of Wrath were not permitted. To answer their questions, the Valar sent emissaries who explained that this world was the eternal home of the elves, and they were fated to experience its pleasures and weariness until the day of doom and end of all things. For this reason, they felt a special connection to the natural world and were invited to enjoy the paradise of the Undying Lands. Arda, however, was not the final home of men, as they had a second destiny awaiting them after death, a fate so secret none but the creator Eru knew what was to come. And so men lived only short lives of relative hardship in this world, and were not to voyage west, as they had another destiny awaiting them in the afterlife. Were they to travel to these forbidden lands, they would be attempting to claim both the gift of elves and men for themselves, and this Eru would not allow. Yet this explanation was not enough to placate the men of Numenor, who stated that awaiting a second destiny after death required great faith, as they could not be certain of Eru's intentions, while going west to the Undying Lands was something they could do within their lifetimes, and might bring them joy in this world, which they loved dearly. And so their anger and fear of death only worsened, shortening their extended lifespans, and pushing them into an imperialist mindset they used to expand and conquer the world. By the reign of Ar-Gimilzor, all elven languages were banned from Numenor, and spies were sent to watch the faithful, a small faction led by the lords of Andúnië who continued to worship Eru. When Gimilzor learned that the faithful were using their western port city to remain in secret contact with the elves of Tol Eressëa, they were forcibly moved to the other side of the island, leading many to leave Numenor entirely and migrate to Pelargir in Middle-earth. Though other kings had spoken and acted against their ancient traditions, Ar-Gimilzor was the first to never climb the mountain Meneltarma in reverence of Eru, and even neglected the white tree Nimloth, a gift from the elves, thought to be tied to the prosperity of the royal family. The white tree Nimloth and its ancestors had a history dating back to the years before the sun, when the white tree of light, Telperion, was destroyed by Morgoth during an attack against Valinor. In honor of this wondrous creation, Yavanna made a second tree in its image, Galathilion, and planted it in the city of Tirion. From Galathilion, a seedling was taken and planted in Tol Eressëa, sprouting the white tree Celeborn. The elves then took a seedling from Celeborn and gifted it to Numenor, where it became the white tree Nimloth, a profound symbol for their king and people. Though Ar-Gimilzor married Inzilbeth, a woman renowned for her great beauty, their marriage was unhappy, as she was secretly one of the faithful and did not agree with her husband's actions and views. Their firstborn son, Inziladun, took after his mother and became one of the faithful, while their second child, Gimilcad, was like his father and became a leader of the Kingsmen. Though Ar-Gimilzor wanted Gimilcad to succeed him, he was unable to change the law, and so when he died in 3177, his firstborn child inherited the scepter and immediately set to work, reversing the corruption which plagued their people. First, he took a Quenya named Tar-Palantir, then tended to the tree Nimloth, stopped persecuting the faithful, and ascended Meneltarma in reverence of Eru. Yet it was not enough to turn the tide that began centuries earlier, and many rebelled against his rule, turning to his brother Gimilcad, leader of the Kingsmen. Disheartened by the civil strife, Tar-Palantir spent much of his time gazing upon the waters of the west, hoping to see a sign from the Valar, but no sign came, and when he died in 3255, so too did his reforms. Although his only child, a daughter Miriel, was raised as a faithful and might have ruled like her father, she lacked popular support, and so her cousin, the son of Gimilcad, staged a coup and forcibly married her to become Ar-Pharazon, the last ruler of Numenor, who reigned at the very height of its power. Meanwhile, in the lands of Middle-earth, The Dark Lord rebuilt his armies after failing to conquer the West in the War of the Elves and Sauron, and in time grew more powerful than ever, expanding his influence in the East and South. To honor his ancient master, Sauron formed the cult of Melkor, building temples dedicated to the worship of the first Dark Lord, performing human sacrifices in his name. Arrogant in his power, Sauron underestimated the strength of the Dunedain, and once again attempted to conquer the West, attacking Numenorian colonies. In his youth, Ar-Pharazon served in these wars against Sauron, gaining much fame, prestige, and wealth from his adventures. Upon returning home, he was generous with his coin and won the loyalty of the people, allowing him to take leadership of the king's men after the death of his father, and used that support to usurp power for himself. Yet Sauron did not fear the king and sent his armies on a great campaign west, causing several Numenorian commanders to sail home and report that the Dark Lord of Mordor had taken a new title, calling himself the King of Men. Outraged by his proclamation, Ar-Pharazon set out to claim the title for himself and spent several years preparing a mighty host to descend upon the east. When at last the Dark Lord's armies saw the full might of the Numenorian fleet sailing into the port of Umbar, they grew so fearful they deserted and fled, allowing Ar-Pharazon and his men to march upon Mordor without opposition. Once arrived, Ar-Pharazon called for Sauron to come forth and humble himself by swearing fealty. Realizing that he underestimated their power, the Dark Lord knew he was defeated in the short term, but also saw this as a unique opportunity to secure victory in the long term, and so devised a new plan to destroy his enemies from within. Taking fair form, Sauron presented himself before Ar-Pharazon and bent the knee, accepting his defeat in words deemed fair and wise. Yet the king was unconvinced that Sauron would truly abide by his oath, and so after stripping him of all lands and titles, brought him to Numenor as a prisoner to ensure he could no longer pose a threat to their colonies on Middle-earth. Though Sauron acted disheartened by the decision, he was actually thrilled, as this was precisely what he wanted. Once in Numenor, Sauron worked hard to ingratiate himself with the royal court and population, using his vast knowledge and skills to help them however possible. Gaining their trust, he then started to teach about his master Melkor, recruiting many into his cult and building a temple. Because Sauron was a Maya, an immortal being older than the world itself, and the people already hated the lords of the West, many, including the king, believed Sauron's teachings, that the god of this world, Eru, did not exist, and the Valar invented him to keep humanity subjugated. But Melkor, the giver of freedom, wanted to liberate them from this oppression, and through his worship, men might become even more powerful than the Valar. Becoming an advisor to the king, Sauron's influence grew, and so he started calling for the white tree Nimloth to be destroyed, and in response, Isildur, one of the faithful and the grandson of Amandil, the lord of Andúnie, broke the law by stealing a fruit from the tree to safeguard its legacy. Unfortunately, this action was seen as a sign by the king, who then ordered Nimloth burned. Growing more stubborn and prideful by the day, Ar-Pharazon dismissed the Lord of Andúnie from his council, a close friend since childhood, so beloved that despite being one of the faithful, he was allowed to serve in the royal court. Fortunately, while Amandil was no longer welcome in the capital, he was still highly respected, and no harm befell him or his family. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like youtube.com/SoulGuideMedical, Lord Tarax Zoron, Ty Gillian Fraser, and Fred Heartless, Knight of Iron and Ice. If you'd like to help CivilizationEx, click on the Patreon link, and please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to see more.